Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka.
What are we talking about today, Dan?
So we got another Ridley Scott movie that didn't get made.
All right.
This one is a little earlier
Okay.
than Gladiator. This is back in the Carol Co. days. Do you remember Carol Co.?
No.
Carol Co. Pictures. They're the ones who made the Terminator movies, RoboCop, and Aliens. Like, they were kind of like the big action... Oh, they made Rambo as well. That was the first big one. But they were like the big action-packed blockbuster movies. Like, they were the ones who were kind of behind that, and Ridley Scott was definitely part of it. But the movie that we're going to be talking about more specifically is a movie called Isobar.
Isobar.
I-S-O-B-A-R. It's actually supposed to be an acronym, and we're going to discuss what that acronym means because it actually gets changed up a few times through the script.
Now, I know nothing about Isobar.
It's a pretty interesting story, and I found it because I was actually reading David Hughes' books about movies that didn't get made, which is called Tales from Development Hell, The Greatest Movies Never Made.
Okay.
I am part of another podcast called Hollywood Movie Factory, where we actually come up with fake script ideas for franchises that might happen.
Okay.
I was just looking through this book for ideas, and I know that when I was reading Gladiator, the topic of Ridley Scott came up, and I mean, his movie history is fascinating, in my opinion, and I stumbled upon Isobar, and that this was going to be aliens on a train, and that's what really sold me, and I was like, this seems fascinating. So I started reading into it, and I was like, this has got to be the next movie that we go after, because I want to make this show kind of a mix of movies that didn't get made that are well known versus movies that didn't get made that not many people know about, and kind of bring those to light as well.
Yeah.
So this was certainly one of them.
What do you think of Ridley Scott as a director? Are you a fan of Ridley Scott?
I don't know if I would say I'm a fan of Ridley Scott, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy his movies at all.
Yeah.
But it's one of those ideas that if I watch the movie and someone said, you know, that was directed by Ridley Scott, and I was like, really? He did a good job with that movie.
Yeah. I've only seen about half a dozen or so Ridley Scott movies. He's one of those filmmakers that I can say, yeah, he's a good filmmaker, but I've never really been that into personally. I think honestly, a lot of his movies I find pretty slow, and they just don't grab me for whatever reason. Like, I couldn't get into Blade Runner at all. I like Alien. The first half of it definitely feels like it drags so much for me. And some of his more recent movies, like, I did not care for Kingdom of Heaven. And I know, like, he's got a lot of recent movies that a lot of people don't really care for. Like, it's very easy to crap on Prometheus and Robin Hood or Exodus.
Because you mentioned that there's a lot of slow pacing when it comes to his films. I think part of it is that Ridley Scott is so caught up in the setting and the set pieces and the environment. I even heard stories about when Harrison Ford was working on Blade Runner, like, Harrison Ford was not happy working with Ridley Scott at all.
When has Harrison Ford ever been happy?
Have you ever heard Harrison Ford do the narration for the Empire Strikes Back trailer?
No, I haven't.
Now, the creators of the biggest smash hit of all time bring you the next episode in the Star Wars saga, The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, he's like really upbeat, but when you hear him doing the voiceovers for Blade Runner,
the theatrical cut of Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Replicants weren't supposed to have feelings. Neither were Blade Runners. What the hell was happening to me?
When you hear him doing the narration for it, it felt like they had to drag him back into the studio, and they're like, you have to do this now. He's like, great. All right, fine, I'll do it. Because he had such a miserable time being on Blade Runner, working with Ridley Scott. And part of the reason why is that Ridley Scott, he is so focused on how his set looks. I mean, living in that world, it's immensely detailed and it's really beautiful to look at. But for Harrison Ford, him coming at this at an actor's approach, he didn't really get many notes from Ridley Scott about who his character was. And he felt like he was simply there as a vessel to have the camera follow him and to show off the sets. He was basically there to be like, look at that thing. Everyone look over there. Everyone look over there. And I guess my story is kind of important.
Huh. Interesting.
It makes me wonder, like, is Harrison Ford, does he really matter in the story of Blade Runner? It's kind of like the Indiana Jones theory of, like, does this pass the Indiana Jones test? If Indiana Jones wasn't there, would the outcome of the movie still happen? Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Nazis find the last Ark, they open it up, their faces melted off.
Yeah.
And you know what? If Indiana Jones wasn't there, the same thing would have happened.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered if he was there or not.
Yeah.
I can understand why he was somewhat bitter at Ridley Scott, but as far as like the visuals that Ridley Scott provides, when you look through Alien, it isn't just a weird looking alien, it's the world that these aliens live in, and it's such an interesting visual that this visual of Alien, if you try to replicate it, like that's the first thing that people are going to be reminded of is that visual and how the alien looks, and it's like exoskeleton and how interesting it is. Or even like Blade Runner with the second movie coming out, like they tried to capture those visuals as well, because that is what Ridley Scott does. He creates a world of visuals that's interesting, that feels lived in, that feels like it is developed.
Yeah.
So on to
anyways,
Carol Co. So back in 1987, Carol Co. Pictures purchased the script Dead Reckoning from the writer Jim Ulls, who would later be known as the writer for Jumper and Fight Club.
Whoa. Jumper and Fight Club. That is a range in quality.
It is. He's not really a well-known screenwriter. Like, looking at his IMDb, it doesn't feel like that's his main gig. Every once in a while, he'll throw out a movie script and it'll get picked up. But yeah, it's interesting. So, according to Jim, the synopsis of Dead Reckoning is, it was a sci-fi action thriller set in the future, in which an altered form of life gets loose on a high-speed runaway underground train. The creature was a humanoid with a genetically altered brain that was intended to be used as the hard drive in a artificial intelligence project. At this time, Carol Co. was beginning to make a name for itself as a major movie studio in Hollywood. They had their Rambo franchise, but they had also, at this time at least, they have not produced them. They had recently purchased the scripts for RoboCop, for Total Recall, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, because they weren't actually in charge of the first Terminator. And it looked like Carol Co. was basically gearing up to be like this major movie studio, which was only going to do huge blockbusters. And there was no way to know that like these were going to be wildly successful movies, and Dead Reckoning was just another one of the scripts that were on the table at the time.
Yeah. It seems kind of like throughout that decade, Legendary Pictures was somewhat of a similar thing. Like, Legendary Pictures produced some of the...
Like the Nolan Batman franchise?
Yeah, like the Nolan Batman franchise, but they did so many of the big action movies. They did Watchmen, they did The Hangover, they did Where the Wild Things Are, Class of the Titans, Inception, The Towns...
Ninja Assassin? Have you ever watched Ninja Assassin?
No, I haven't.
That's so much fun.
Pacific Rim.
Sucker Punch.
Godzilla. Jurassic World.
They're still going.
Oh, yeah.
They just produced the new Dune film.
Oh, really?
And they're doing a Godzilla versus...
Detective Pikachu.
Yeah. I guess that's the modern day equivalent to Carol Co. is Legendary. And like, Legendary's doing great. And I mean, Carol Co. looks like they were doing great as well, but... we kind of know what happened there. But yeah, they were just gearing up for like all of these major movies. Now, the main producer and the kind of the common denominator throughout most of the life of, at least at this point, Dead Reckoning was Joel Silver, the producer Joel Silver. At the time, he was the producer for Predator, Lethal Weapon, Commando, Weird Science, 48 Hours, and The Warriors. Right away, the production was off to a great start, and the director that they thought would be perfect for the story, Ridley Scott.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Scott was not doing well in his career, though, at the time. I mean, he did find much success after doing Alien and Blade Runner, but he started to get some bad reputations after he directed 2 flops, which was Legend and Someone to Watch Over. So he and Silver thought that this would actually boost his status, finding this great script and be like, well, you can do sci-fi really well. Let's get you back on that train, both metaphorically and literally. Along with Ridley Scott, Silver then hired the production designer Norris Spencer, who would continue to work with Scott in a lot of future productions like Black Rain, Thelma and Louise, 1492, Conquest of Paradise, and Hannibal. I forgot he directed Hannibal.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I liked Hannibal. Maybe I am a fan of Ridley Scott and I just didn't realize it till now. Soon after, Scott brought on the artist H.R. Giger. He was the guy who was responsible behind the look of the Alien franchise. He actually made his debut when they did the film adaptation of Dune. But honestly, like, there needs to be a museum dedicated to H.R. Giger, honestly. Like, his art is amazing, and we'll have to post some of that art on our Instagram and link some of that on our Twitter page. But, like, it is incredible. And judging from his style, like, he really made Alien what Alien is. Yeah, Ridley Scott just kind of like let him loose, and they're like, all right, they're aliens. And he just went wild with his imagination, and he came up with like some really unique stuff. So definitely check out his work. Ridley Scott and Giger were excited to work together again. Once Giger was briefed on the story, which was then changed to The Train, he got to work on the look of the movie and spent nearly 9 months between 1988 and 1989 drawing sketches of how he envisioned the film. Wow. At the time, though, Ridley Scott didn't actually have a contract with Carol Co., but that didn't stop Giger from working. He had this to say, if someone is telling me something, I'm always so enthusiastic that I don't want to wait until contracts are done. Otherwise, I will lose interest. I understand that, but yeah, that's a really risky move there. I have to do it when I have the spark. Okay, so I get it. During the time, though, Giger found it difficult to get in contact with Scott and was surprised to find out that he was going to be directing Thelma and Louise for MGM. So he's looking at him like, what the hell's happening here? When Scott finally called Giger, he informed him that he left the projects 3 weeks prior. Such a dick move. Because he couldn't make an agreement with Joel Silver and wasn't allowed the creative freedom that he thought he would have to make the movie. So Giger, and I really feel bad for him at this point, because during the months he was working, like, it was unpaid that he was working for. And he actually unintentionally came up with the design for Syl, which was the alien used in the movie Species.
Okay.
A new sequence of DNA. Friendly instructions on how to combine it with ours.
This growth is amazing.
If you haven't seen Species, it's like...
I haven't.
It's an interesting movie. I don't know if it's related to Splice in any way, just because Joel Silver was a producer for that. I don't know. Splice is such a weird fucked up movie. I don't know if that's in any way related, but definitely Syl from Species. A lot of those designs went to that character there. So it wasn't all for waste. Yeah. But Giger did have this to say about this, is that I had an idea about Syl dreaming up about a ghost train. A train which comes and picks up people who are waiting at the station. She eats to get power. I worked on this train and put a lot of my own money into it. In fact, Giger actually spent upwards to about $100,000 of his own money and created a 3D model of this train. He actually filmed it in action going through his garden. If you go on YouTube, you can actually find the video that he had put together of this train. It's like big enough for someone to actually sit in it and just kind of like go through his garden and experience it, it's weird and fascinating. It's so like
interesting.
It reminds me a lot of the army ships that they used in Avatar: The Last Airbender for the Fire Nation.
Okay.
It has a lot of similar looks to that.
Do we know much about the story and the script of this? Is it completely taking place on a train like Snowpiercer, or?
Yes. We do have some synopsis of the story. The story of this movie has been, I don't want to say it's been buried, but not well recognized.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't really find a script for it, even though there's been multiple scripts written and multiple drafts written for it. I'm surprised that none of them actually got leaked or put out there, or at least in any obvious place that I could find. A lot of the artwork for it is out there, and even like looking at Giger's train, you can see that, and that's pretty fascinating though.
Yeah.
But we'll get into some of the story, and it'll give you a good idea of like what was supposed to happen. Anyway, Ridley Scott's gone. Joel Silver decided that the script needed some rebranding, and this is where they changed the name of it from The Train now to Isobar, because the definition of Isobar is a line on a map connecting points having the same atmospheric pressure at a given time or on average over a given period.
Okay.
I don't know why he chose that, but he decided that it should definitely be an acronym. We'll get to that soon. The problem with changing the name is that there was another script floating around under the same title, which was written by Jerry Cunningham, that had been written for the producers Lawrence Gordon, John Davis, and Joel Silver himself. At the same time, Carolco originally bought Dead Reckoning, so he literally became a conflict of interest to himself. Nor should we forget to mention that Dead Reckoning was already the name of a movie that starred Humphrey Bogart and Elizabeth Scott in 1947.
The trunk compartment. Louis Ord's body's back there.
So in Cunningham's script, he described the plot as a mutant professional fighter in a future world on a quest to discover the truth of his origins. So they wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to play the lead role, but he was asking for $5 million to do the film, and it didn't go anywhere. Arnold went on to do Total Recall instead.
See you at the party, Richter!
So with the other Isobar gone, that left the name open for Joel Silver to use, and he was determined to make that happen. And that's when he helped explain the name. So Jim Olds had to come up with an explanation for the name and settled on the idea that it would be an acronym for Intercontinental Subterranean Oscillomagnetic Ballistic Aerodynamic Railway. Really rolls off the tongue there. In the end, it was just a stupid fancy way to say it's a bullet train in a tube. That's what it is. It's the Hyperloop. That's what it is. So it's the same idea of like putting it into a vacuum tube and then shooting a train as fast as possible through it.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is like, how do you create a train in which no one can escape? And that's actually a pretty good idea for it.
Yeah.
So around 1990, Silver then hired Dean Delvin and Roland Emmerich. He was a German director who would later on go on to direct Stargate, Independence Day, Godzilla, that's the one with Matthew Broderick, The Patriot, The Day After Tomorrow, 2012, White House Down, and Independence Day Resurgence.
Yep.
So he's definitely got like that sci-fi blood inside him.
Yeah.
They had both built a reputation that they could make a good sci-fi movie after they had made the film Moon 44.
A world of intergalactic corporations locked in ruthless rivalry. A world of desperate technologies competing for shrinking resources. Moon 44.
As soon as Emmerich read the script, he requested to do another major rewrite and had Delvin take on the task, while Silver had planned on doing another rewrite himself. This one was going to be written by Stephen E. D'Souza, who would eventually go on to write Die Hard, but in this one, it would actually have a much more uplifting note. Joel Silver didn't even bother reading Delvin's draft and insisted that D'Souza's draft was the direction he wanted the film to go in. Roland was not happy with Joel Silver or the new draft, so he decided to leave the project as well. 2 directors down. Joel Silver's still going strong, though.
Yeah.
D'Souza's take on the first draft was, The original script was one of these usual dystopian, post-apocalyptic futures, and the movie was a complete ripoff of Aliens. It was sort of like Aliens combined with Alien, with a squad of guys assigned to catch this monster and bring it in for study by the company. It was a shameless ripoff, but then they had to get the train to its final destination, which made no sense at all. So that's from De Souza talking about Old's script. Another issue that De Souza had was with the monster itself. He thought that if the monster is so dangerous, why would they ship it on one of these trains filled with innocent people? He also wasn't sure about the description of the monster being a guy in a suit kind of monster that lives off of adrenaline and sucks adrenaline out of people like a vampire. It reminded him of the movie It, the terror from beyond space.
They won't die.
Eric, hurry! Hurry!
What about Bob? Look, there's nothing we can do. Get that blood up there fast. Don't stop.
Which was a ripoff of A.E. Van Gort's short stories Black Destroyer and Discord in Scarlet. In his words, Isobar was a ripoff of a ripoff. Plus, the creature shared way too many qualities with the alien creature in Alien. So, from the beginning, he's like, this isn't a unique story at all, and we really have to like dissect it and really make this movie its own thing.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Yeah. We should mention that the main actor that they were looking for was Sylvester Stallone. There was a few characteristics that he had issues with. So he originally wanted him to be a scientist who brings the creature onto the train, which if that character was smart enough, he would never actually bring that creature onto a civilian train in the first place. So De Souza opted to make him just a regular guy, which was much like Die Hard. Because in Die Hard, like John McClane, he wasn't like a special ops type person. Like he was just a cop.
Yeah.
That's all he was. And he was going up against like a major terrorist group. So like that's why we're rooting for him. That entire movie was like, he's not Rambo going after them. So, and he didn't like the idea of it being like Rambo versus Alien, which honestly, I would probably watch Alien versus Rambo. It's like a great movie.
Oh my gosh, it would be insane.
So they came back with the idea that maybe Sylvester Stallone should be a security guard. But De Souza was really headstrong on him being just an ordinary passenger on a train. But they did come up with an interesting solution with the studio going back and forth with De Souza, because the producer, Mario Casar, he gave this example of a passenger on a British Airway Concorde flight. He said, this guy kept ringing the stewardess for all kinds of stuff. He doesn't need his pillow. But then at the end of the flight, he called over the stewardess and said, I work for British Airways. That's why I'm being difficult, and you are great. With that, they decided that Sly would then be that type of character, a man who's on the inside but is undercover as a supervisor for the company. They never actually came up with the name of the company who like made this monster thing. So like,
but the company doesn't really matter as much. It's like the company in Alien. Like nobody really needs to know the name of whatever mining company they're working for.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for the logo, like Umbrella Company would be immediately forgettable in the Resident Evil movies or in the games as well. Like they're the big bads over there. And that's really the point they need to get across.
Yeah.
So next, De Souza had to explain why the train. So as an exponential explanation, the story takes place in a distant future where global warming is so bad that jet-fueled air travel has been banned, and the pollution is so potent citizens are wearing masks whenever they get any unsafe air alerts. To make this trip special and to last as long as the movie, they decided that this would be a transatlantic trip, making its first debut trip from New York City all the way to London, which has actually been a real proposition to make a tube that goes that far. With all this set up, this left room for an ensemble of characters. There was the love interest, which was going to be played by Kim Basinger, who had recently appeared in Batman as Vicky Vale.
A lot of people think you're as dangerous as the Joker.
The con artist was going to be played by Michael Jeter, who had recently done a supporting role in Stallone's other movie, Tango and Cash. A special role was written for the legendary Italian actress, Sophia Loren, and the bubbling entrepreneur that made his fortune selling eggs and sperm over what was the equivalent of the internet at the time, because we didn't know what the internet was. That was going to be played by Jim Belushi, which was going to add comedy to it. The other roles that were introduced but were not cast was the rich woman taking her granddaughter to a prearranged marriage. Okay, a stowaway boy that would become the teenage love interest of the granddaughter, an older couple with a Walter Matthau type character, just because they wanted Walter Matthau in the movie. So they kind of cast that knowing that they probably won't get him.
When I initially heard this idea, I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be some cool sci-fi genre H.R. Giger designs that's going to be awesome, like really lean into some of the genre stuff, like with this enclosed location and how that'll add into tension and all that. Like this could be really interesting. But as we piece the script together, or like the idea but together and the cast together, I mean, really it was just like all downhill from Sylvester Stallone. This is just would have been another forgettable 80s action movie. Would have been completely meaningless and honestly sounds like a waste of Giger's designs.
Yeah. And I feel like they would have kind of tossed a lot of his designs aside. And DeSouza's really there just to kind of like clean up the mess, where he's probably getting suggestions from multiple producers, actors, other writers as well.
Yeah.
He's giving all these puzzle pieces. He's like, I got to put it together and I need it to make sense. That's really all I need to do. With all the ducks in the row, this left DeSouza to establish the most important character, which was the creature.
Yeah.
So he drew inspiration for the alien creature Ymir from the 1957 film 20 Million Miles to Earth.
Some of you may also have heard the story of a monster now confined here in Rome Zoo. That beast is from Venus.
In the film, the alien seems harmless, but after people are mean to it, it grows to an enormous size and begins destroying Rome, and is eventually destroyed in the Colosseum. Another inspiration for this creature came from the Howard Hawks film, The Thing from Another World.
Gentlemen, do you realize what we've found? A being from another world, as different from us as...
It made like a plant-based creature. Now, this monster would be an experiment that had gone wrong. This was going to be a hybrid plant that was made to combat global warming. It would grow fast and produce oxygen at an enormous rate. And this would cause the creature to constantly thirst for water. And if that source wasn't readily available, it would have to extract it from other sources, like from humans. Yeah. This would actually dehydrate its victim and kind of leave them into like a crumbling pile of dust, which we kind of see in Heat Vision and Jack.
Oh, yeah.
To create this legendary creature, they actually hired a special effects artist, Rick Baker. His creatures and special effects, they've been used in a lot of films that you've probably seen before. It's been used in American Werewolf in London. I think that was the first year the Academy Award had actually recognized special effects in movies and made that a category, was because of that movie.
Yeah.
I know it definitely won the Academy Award for that. So he was the big mind behind that. His work has been used in Star Wars, The Exorcist, Captain EO, and Harry and the Hendersons, and that's just a few of them. So this was at the time that this is what he was known for. Later on in his career, he would eventually work for Gremlins 2, The New Batch, Ed Wood, Batman Forever, The Nutty Professor, Escape from L.A., Men in Black, Meet Joe Young, Wild Wild West, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Planet of the Apes, the 2001 version, The Ring, Hellboy, X-Men, The Last Stand, Enchanted, Norbit, Tropic Thunder, Tron Legacy, and Maleficent. That's just to name a few of the things that he's done.
Yeah.
This guy is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
The pieces that he created for the film itself was this tentacle arm, which would actually reach out and then penetrate its victim. He also made the very first victim of the movie. He actually made this lifelike person that would actually deflate It almost looked like they were drying out.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's so fascinating.
Wonder if it would have looked anything like one of the guys at the end of Indiana Jones when he gets like this face sucked in.
Yeah, it was kind of like a balloon, just like air getting sucked out of it, just kind of like. You can actually see what this tentacle looks like, and I accidentally stumbled upon this auction website where you can actually buy this tentacle arm. I could have this arm if I want to. That would be amazing. It's fascinating. Like, he actually spent a lot of money. So, like, him and Giger together, they were making some really fascinating, interesting stuff just for this movie. But there were some other additions that they wanted to make to the script. One of them is that they wanted to kill the hero early, which means Stallone wouldn't have made it to the end of the movie. He drew a lot of this inspiration from watching Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock movie, where we're following, I forget her name.
Oh, man, it's been a while since I've watched Psycho.
But, I mean, if you remember, like, we follow her for the longest time. She steals the money. She needs to get out. And she's killed. And all of a sudden, the movie's no longer about her, but the guy trying to preserve his mother. And
or it's also like the latest Godzilla movie with Bryan Cranston, where he was like kind of one of the selling points of the movie, and he dies in the first act.
I kind of like that trope in movies, that you kill off the main character who you perceive as the main character, because in this case, like, you get the sense that there's no hope.
Yeah, it definitely makes the danger feel real.
At least at this time, Sylvester Stallone, like, he's coming off of doing Rambo, and we kind of expect, like, oh, Rambo's gonna save us, and then Rambo dies, and you're like, fuck. To add to it, there had to be a malfunction to the communication from the outside to the inside of the train, which was explained. DeSoso actually explained that what would happen is that the company, the people that worked for the company, they would sabotage the communication system because they didn't want to get the word out that this monster had gotten loose on the train and that this was dangerous, especially this being the debut of this train going from New York City to London. Like, they want more people to keep on riding this train, and people know that it's dangerous, or if they know that the company's using it to help transport very dangerous monsters, people don't want to go there anymore.
You know, it's so funny that it sounds like they're like, well, of course we have to make sure there's no way for them to communicate with anybody, but what if they could still communicate? What's anybody on the outside going to be able to do with this train going at bullet speeds underneath the ocean? Like, it seems like that was a detail added in just to make it so it's like, oh, yeah, they don't have any connection to the outside world, even more danger. But, like, how terrifying would it be if you could contact the outside, but there was nothing that they could do about it? Like, what could somebody do about it?
I mean, the word could get to, if this is going to London, this could go to the UK government, and they could just decide to halt the train and just let the situation sort itself out.
And then it's even more terrifying.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. That would be an interesting one. I don't know. I guess it's more complicated. It's kind of like, have you ever seen movie plot holes that would be fixed if that character had a phone?
No, I haven't.
There's one of, like, Forrest Gump, where he's sitting there on the bench waiting to get to the bus to Jenny. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the movie, he realizes that, like, she was just a few apartments down, and he gotten a call at the beginning of the movie, and he's like, oh, Jenny, are you there? Yeah, he's like, I'm just down the road. He's like, okay, I'll be there in a second. And we wouldn't have had that whole journey. So maybe they were just trying to work around, like, because that's another added element that then you have to write and deal with, and that I feel like is just more of a headache. So I think DeSoso was like, you know what? No one gets to communicate because I don't want to write that.
Yeah.
We already have like 20 characters. I don't want to have to deal with any more of that.
Yeah.
So I get that. And then this would be interesting to be like, you had these people who initially cut off the communication. They sabotaged the train, but now realize that they have to work together with the civilians on the train because now it's all of them versus the monster.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
With the story improving, Silver brought on a new production designer, which was Dante Ferretti, who had previously worked on multiple Italian productions. Eventually, he would be Martin Scorsese's main production designer. Like, he worked with him for Casino, Gangs of New York, The Aviator, Shutter Island, and Hugo, and just a bunch of other notable films. Mm-hmm. He also worked on The Black Dahlia. I know that wasn't Scorsese, but he did Black Dahlia, Sweeney Todd, and the Disney live-action remake of Cinderella. They also brought on the costume designer Marilyn Vance, who had worked on 48 Hours, Predator, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Romancing the Stone, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Untouchables, Pretty Woman, The Rocketeer, and Die Hard. And later down the line, she actually worked for Mystery Men, which I thought was pretty cool. John Hughes was definitely a fan of her. The direction that they were looking for was more of like this retro futuristic look, so they worked hand in hand with each other.
Yeah.
So around 1995 now, Carol Crowe had recently released Rennie Harlin's film Cutthroat Island.
We set sail for Cutthroat Island!
Which was a flop. And the film's budget was $98 million. And it only made $10 million in the box office. And this actually caused Carol Crowe to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I am not sure how bankruptcy fully works, but I know like that's not the bad one. Like I really don't know how that works, but I know that, I mean, if a company has to file for any type of bankruptcy, they're already in hot water. It's not looking good for them. On top of that, the producers Mario Kassar and Andrew Vanja left the production, but Vanja went on to create Synergy Pictures Entertainment, and he actually teamed up with DeSouza to make Judge Dredd, which then starred Sylvester Stallone.
I never broke the law! I am the law!
And he had this to say: movies get made not because the script is great, but because someone likes the script at that point. I thought is an interesting way to like encapsulate like almost everything that we've been covering.
Yeah,
almost.
Makes a lot of sense.
So Carol Crowe, they started selling off a lot of their assets and properties in the bankruptcy hearing, and one of those included Isobar, which was going to go for around $5 to $7 million. The weird thing about this is like, even though Kassar and Vejna, even though they left Carol Crowe, they actually showed up for the bankruptcy hearing to actually purchase some of the items there, which seems like such a backstabbing thing. Is like they were the ones who were partly like steering the ship as it was sinking, and then they abandoned ship and came back to the ship and be like, you know, we'll take some parts of the ship for ourselves.
Yeah.
Man, that seems odd. DeSouza thought about buying the film, but for him, that was way too expensive for him, and thought maybe Sylvester Stallone might want to buy the film.
But why would Stallone want to buy it if he's going to die in the first 30 minutes?
Well, I mean, he didn't, but he thought maybe he would. But instead, the rights of the film, oddly enough, went back in the hands of Roland Emmerich and Dean Delvin. If you remember from they were the second round of directors and writers going into this film. And they actually made a negotiation to have Sony buy the film. And they didn't have to pay the full $7 to $5 million. And instead, they actually paid, this description, pennies on the dollar to get this, or cents on the dollar to do it. So they didn't have to pay full price for it. Unfortunately, at this time, this is when they just released the 1998 Godzilla, the one with Matthew Broderick, which that film brought in $375 million in the box office, which I guess didn't seem as successful. So like the studio wasn't really sold on them making Isobar. Yeah. Because, I mean, the budget of the movie was $150 million. So they made just over double what they spent. So I don't see why like that was looked upon as like unsuccessful.
That budget number never includes things like marketing and stuff like that. Like those big blockbusters, you've got to make like 3 to 4 times your budget for it to be considered successful.
Yeah, I guess. It just seemed like at least they were in the black when they did that. So I don't know. I don't see why they would pass up on this, but anyway. But this left another project of theirs, which is Super Tanker. Fascinating. That never actually got greenlit because of that. And so because of that, that kind of led them down to never making Isobar. But they did hire writer Tab Murphy. He was asked to write the script for Super Tanker while they were trying to put that together. Tab Murphy, he had also written Last of the Dogmen, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Tarzan, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Brother Bear, and Batman Year One.
Okay.
He seems to be pretty dedicated to Disney, from what I see, though.
Yeah, a lot of Disney animated stuff.
While he was working on Super Tanker, he renamed the script to Fantastic Voyage, which shares the same name as a movie from 1966.
Yeah.
I don't know why they're taking all these
Why they keep
titles from older movies. Stop doing it. Anyway.
Fantastic Voyage just doesn't fit the movie at all, too.
No.
Like, that's a weird choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they were discussing the plot of Fantastic Voyage, Dean Delvin and the writer Tab Murphy. So they were discussing what that would look like, and they thought that it would just be a bunch of people going to a savage planet and just like hunting down monsters. And in that discussion, Delvin actually brought up the topic of Isobar and the fact that they still have the rights for it, but like no one's making it. And Murphy, he just kind of lost interest in Fantastic Voyage and was like really interested in Isobar. In 2001, so that's when Elmerich and Delvin, they decided to split in their different ways. But Delvin, he ended up starting the Electric Entertainment Company. They worked on separate companies, but they knew that if Isobar was ever greenlit, that they would eventually work back together. So Murphy, he actually visited Delvin at the Electric Entertainment to discuss the rewrites for Isobar, and he actually got a hold of DeSouza's script and the pre-production artwork and started working on the first draft, which actually was not well received. Murphy had this to say: "I think it had to do with the lead character, whom I had written as a hard-biting, cynical sort of anti-hero, which wasn't what they were looking for. Then I wrote another draft, which they were happy with. In this draft, which was titled The Isobar Run,
okay,
it starts with a view from space zooming into Earth and realizing that it's been scorched and turned brown from global warming. We then cut to old Los Angeles, 2097, where the living situation is toxic. Like no one actually lives on the surface. But underground, though, underneath Los Angeles, we see a flourishing new Los Angeles. The characters Prine and Ollie are the witness of the maiden voyage of Isobar Mark V. Now, in this draft, the acronym for Isobar now stands for Intercontinental Superconducting Oscillating Ballistic Automatic Railway. I think that was just his way of saying, like, you know what? I can make a better acronym. Which, the first one was kind of clunky.
Yeah.
This one comes off the tongue just a little better. The train was built to travel from LA to Hawaii, and its final destination was to reach Tokyo. Prine and Ollie board the train as it takes off, reaching speeds of up to 2,000 kilometers per hour, which is around 1,200 miles per hour. Much like the first draft, the train is filled with a variety of innocent passengers, while the train is also carrying a deadly creature. The plant-like creature spreads through the train, killing hundreds of passengers and sucking them dry. The inside of the train, it looks like it's infested with vines, where the creature can store its victims, much like the cocoons that we see in Aliens. The creature damages the train so much that it won't stop, and it's actually a runaway train. And the very first stop it's going to go to, or I guess run through, would be Hawaii. Prine discovers, while witnessing all this horror, that the creature is able to produce an incredible amount of oxygen, which, if sustained correctly, it would replenish the Earth's oxygen level within 10 years and make the surface habitable again. So now, what is our hero to do? He is now set with this dilemma, which I think is pretty interesting, that we have this creature that could, if flourishing, could actually save the world, but also destroy every human in its wake. The script did seem promising, but after looking over what this film could potentially cost, that is what it led down to its downfall. They estimated that the cost of this film would be around $120 million. They actually tried to reduce it down to around $80 million to make. Had they gone with the original budget, which was $90 million in 1999, with inflation in the mid-2000s, this film would actually cost around $200 million to do.
Does not seem worth it.
Yeah. Even with Emmerich having a reputation of like making these big budget movies, like he did The Day After Tomorrow, 2012 and 10,000 BC. I don't see why they wouldn't take a chance on this. I know that's a lot of money, but he's known for making these big epic movies.
He's known for making these big epic movies, but it's like a different kind of sci-fi. It's more like near future sci-fi, or what would happen if this event happened to people of today type of thing. What they're asking for here is like an entirely new Earth, an entirely new world. Your set dressing and costume design and stuff, you can't use what is just regular, normal, modern day stuff, or modern day at the time stuff. Like it would require something entirely new from every aspect. And so I can definitely see how like that kind of a big budget thing is scary. And especially at this time, we're moving further and further away from the original sci-fi ideas of the 80s, even if how cheesy some of those would be, like Total Recall or RoboCop. We're moving away from that kind of era of things.
And I guess we're getting a lot of the reboots, because we got a new RoboCop and we got a new Total Recall as well.
Yeah, that was like early 2010s, I think.
Yeah, and I don't recall them being that successful. I guess we'll have to see if they were or not. But like, I guess that kind of makes sense. I mean, they weren't giving up on this film either. They actually went to the 2007 Cannes Film Festival, where it caught a lot of people's interest, which makes sense. Like aliens on a train, plant monster eats people on a bullet train. That sounds fascinating. But for a lot of the investors that were out there, a lot of the producers, they just said like, it was just too expensive. There's no way that we can do this, support it. It's just way too hard. But later on, Delvin found himself working for the writer Margot Schnabel, who was part of the Austin Powers franchise. He actually directed The Love Guru.
Okay.
He also wrote the sequels, The Librarian, A Return to King Solomon's Mines, and Librarian 3, The Curse of the Judas Chalice. Delvin discussed Isobar, and Schnabel was so interested that he wanted to write a new draft, so Delvin then hired him on to write that new draft. Delvin's take on the new draft is that it's a much grittier character now, and it doesn't have to be an action movie here. What it has to be is someone who can carry the depth of the character, because he's going through a lot, and he's reliving a crisis in his life that happened years earlier, so it's pretty tough. To me, someone like Clive Owen would be amazing for the role. I think it's a great project, and I still intend on making it. It's still very optimistic that we're going to get this thing going in the next couple of years. So, much like Gladiator 2, it's still living on, at least in this case, with Dean Delvin.
It seems to me like this kind of sci-fi story, but the kind of sci-fi story it is, keeps changing and shifting a little bit, but it's always like 10 years late as to what it's supposed to be. This story first gets to put together in the mid to late 80s to be like a very much, you know, this Ridley Scott, H.R. Giger doing Alien type thing again, but 10 years after Alien came out and was, well, maybe not quite 10 years after, but Alien came out and was this big thing. And so then it starts to become this Sylvester Stallone genre piece 10 years after we have things like Rambo, where that would be a viable thing. And then it starts to become this Roland Emmerich sci-fi kind of disaster movie 10 years after Roland Emmerich was relevant with things like Independence Day. And now we're talking about, oh, it's going to be this gritty, dark piece with Clive Owen. 10 years after the gritty, dark thing is what was dominating movies.
Yeah.
And so it just feels to me like Joel Silver is just kind of not realizing what the times want and keeps trying to modify this based off of what was successful in the past. And so nobody's ever going to bite onto this because it can't stay relevant to what people want to see. I mean, if anything, if they wanted to make this movie is something interesting and something people will latch onto, go back to the original drawing board of the Ridley Scott, H.R. Giger kind of brooding alien-style movie. You know, that's kind of like hitting that almost nostalgia bubble of remaking something that we had 40 years ago.
Yeah, adding the H.R. Giger stuff and even adding in Rick Baker, I think those two would make a fascinating film. I don't think we need to necessarily attach Ridley Scott to this.
Ridley Scott now is not who Ridley Scott was when Alien first came out.
There's so many things that are still interesting about the movie, but for me, it doesn't feel like any of the ideas are really fresh.
Yeah.
Like the idea of a monster having to feast on humans for it to survive. The idea of like this weird creature like keeping people in pods like we saw in Aliens, or even people being stuck on a train.
Yeah.
Like we have Train to Busan, the zombie movie, we have
Snowpiercer.
I get the idea of like people being in a confined area where they can't escape.
Yeah.
I mean, movies do this all the time where they're just borrowing ideas from like different areas, but this just feels like it's too blatantly on the nose.
Yeah.
As like a copy of this and it puts in here, and it's just taking those elements where none of it really feels like an original idea. It just feels like they took this idea from another film, another piece of pop culture, literature, whatever, and they're just trying to fit it all together and make it work and somehow make some sort of cohesive story. Even the story of like the Earth being so uninhabitable because of global warming. We have WALL-E for that.
The picture of global warming that this is showing is something that it's kind of like an outdated view of talking about global warming as this distant event that will radically change everything. When movies want to talk about climate change, or when stories want to think about climate change now, it's through a very different, much more present lens.
I don't really see a message coming out of this movie either. Like with Alien and Aliens, like they had a message about humanity and survival and what that means. It feels like people just living in that moment, in that time.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, and now there's a monster as well. And now we have to deal with that monster. I do like the idea of, in the later script, of the guy debating with himself on like whether or not he needs to destroy this creature that could potentially save the world. Mm-hmm. Like that's an interesting conflict to have, but I don't feel like it's a strong enough message that you're going to take away something from this film. I'm okay with this being a movie that won't get made, or never get made. I don't think, even if it came out, like I'd be excited to see like this movie finally got made. But
yeah, I mean, it would be interesting, but if it did get made now, I think there's no way it wouldn't be disappointing.
Yeah.
It just seems like another story of so many people with their fingers on this who are looking for what's going to be the most successful as opposed to what's going to be the most interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, it keeps attracting writers for sure, and keeps attracting producers to be like, this is going to be great. I feel like so much of the focus is on how are we going to sell it. I feel like the story has to happen first. I mean, DeSouza was there to like try and fix everything and just say like, we need a cohesive story that's going to make sense and make it interesting. But yeah, I feel like there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
So I guess we're both in agreement. This is not something that we necessarily feel like we need to see. Again, I keep coming back to H.R. Giger because I just think he is such an interesting guy and his art is so interesting. And like, I love that it's a vehicle for more H.R. Giger art.
Yeah. And I really wish that would have been the case. And I really wish they went forward with that, or at least like kept him on the project. And I wonder if with the bankruptcy hearing and like trying to sell all the properties, I wonder if Giger's stuff actually would have come with it or not.
I imagine it would have.
Yeah, but he spent a lot of his own money to do so, and I don't feel like Carol Co. actually like reimbursed him for it.
So he might still have had the rights to his own art.
Yeah. Ridley Scott was the one to bring him onto the project, but Ridley Scott was not under contract with Silver or Carol Co., which means for Giger, he was 2 degrees separated from the original project itself.
Yeah.
I don't think they actually own his art that he would have made for it, which is probably why he was able to do something like Species and actually give the character of Syl to Species.
Yeah, that's
just
true.
Because he had the rights to it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's going to be the note we end on. This is just another movie they're still trying to make, but probably will never ever get made.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Don't make this film. Just move on. Make another Independence Day movie if that works.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for listening. If you want to check out more of this show, go find all of our episodes at pipedreampodcast.com. You can also find The Weird Alphabet, which features both Dan and I. And you can also find Come On Fahoogwa Pods, which I am on with Michael Hunter talking about Homestar Runner cartoons. Yeah. You can send us your emails to notgetmade@gmail.com. Again, that email address is notgetmade@gmail.com. We'd love to hear if you have anything to add that we may have missed from one of these movies, or if you've got other movies or TV shows that we should talk about. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter, we are at HDTNGM, and on Instagram, we are at How Did This Not Get Made? Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.